When most people think of America, they imagine a country born in revolution. They see flags, founding fathers, frontier myths, great cities, and a national story that seems to begin in the 18th century. In that version of history, America appears almost suddenly, as if the continent only truly entered the world when Europeans drew borders, planted colonies, and eventually created the United States. But that is not where the story begins. Long before the 13 colonies, long before the Declaration of Independence, and long before Europeans called this place the New World, North America was already alive with memory, meaning, and power. Its forests, rivers, deserts, plains, and mountains were not empty spaces waiting to be claimed. They were known, named, traveled, defended, and loved. They belonged to people whose histories stretched back not just centuries, but many thousands of years. By the time Europeans began arriving in large numbers, North America was already richly populated by many distinct native communities, each with its own culture and way of life. And that matters because one of the deepest myths about early America is not simply that it is young. It is that the land which became America was somehow empty before Europeans arrived. It was not empty. It was full of nations. So how did those nations get there? According to the main scientific view, the ancestors of native peoples reached the Americas from Asia in deep prehistory, during the Ice Age, when lower sea levels exposed a land bridge known as Beringia, where the Bering Strait is today. The exact timing is still debated, but the movement happened many thousands of years before Columbus, often placed somewhere in the range of about 15,000 to more than 20,000 years ago, with some research suggesting even earlier human presence in the Americas. Over immense stretches of time, those early populations spread across the continents and became hundreds of different peoples, speaking different languages, building different societies, and adapting to radically different worlds. That is why the word Indian is so misleading. It did not come from who these people were. It came from Columbus being wrong. When Christopher Columbus reached the Americas in 1492, he believed he had reached the Indies, and so Europeans began calling the people they met Indians. The name stayed even though it was based on a mistake, and the mistake was bigger than geography. It also flattened hundreds of different nations into one false image, as if all native peoples belonged to a single civilization. They did not. To understand America before America, you have to let go of the idea that there was one people living here. There was no single native world. There were many worlds at once, each shaped by its own land, climate, memory, and tradition. In the Northeast, among forests, lakes, and river systems, the Haudenosaunee built one of the most remarkable political alliances in North American history. Long before the United States created its own federal institutions, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy united the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca. Later, the Tuscarora joined them in 1722. This was not a loose label invented by outsiders. It was a real political structure built on diplomacy, balance, and collective decision-making. It is one of the clearest reminders that advanced political thought did not arrive in North America from Europe. It was already here. Farther south, in the woodlands and river valleys of the Southeast, peoples such as the Cherokee lived in settled homelands shaped by farming, kinship, and long-established community life. By the time Europeans began colonizing that region, the Cherokee were one of the largest politically integrated peoples in that part of North America. Their world was not the world of the northern forests, And it was not the world of the plains. It was its own landscape of mountains, forests, agriculture, and ancestral territory. In the Southwest, life took on a very different form. In places like Mesa Verde, the ancestors of today's Pueblo peoples built enduring communities from stone and earth. The first ancestral Pueblo people arrived in the Mesa Verde area around the year 550. At first, they lived in pit houses dug into the ground. Over time, they became more settled, farmed corn, beans, and squash, made pottery, and built larger pueblos. Later, they created the cliff dwellings that still seem almost impossible when you see them today. If the forests of the East created one kind of society, and the Southeast another, the high desert created something else entirely, a world of stone, skill, adaptation, and spiritual life built into a difficult landscape. And across the center of the continent, on the lands that would one day be called the Mississippi Valley and the American Midwest, another great world rose, one that still shocks people when they first hear of it. Because one of the strongest myths about early North America is that before Europeans, there were no true cities here, no large centers of organized life, no urban worlds. But that myth begins to collapse the moment you hear the name Cahokia. Near present-day St. Louis, Cahokia became the largest archaeological site of the Mississippian culture and one of the greatest pre-Columbian cities in North America. It was occupied roughly from around the year 700 to around 1400, and at its peak from about 1050 to 1200, it covered more than 6 square miles. Its population is estimated at about 10,000 to 20,000 people, roughly comparable to London toward the end of the same period. Think about what that means. While much of Europe was still centuries away from the modern world, a vast native city was already rising in North America, with monumental earth mounds, ceremonial spaces, social hierarchy, and a level of organization that still does not fit the popular myth of a primitive continent. Cahokia matters for more than its size. It matters because it changes the emotional shape of the story. Once you know it existed, it becomes much harder to imagine North America before Europeans as a silent wilderness. You begin to see something else, a continent already filled with centers of power, sacred landscapes, trade routes, political worlds, and inherited memory. In other words, you begin to see that the history of America did not begin with the Americans, and the Haudenosaunee, the Cherokee, the Pueblo ancestors, and the people of Cahokia were only part of the picture. Across the continent, there were many more nations, each adapted to its own world. On the Great Plains, cultures changed over time as mobility, hunting, and later the spread of the horse transformed life across the grasslands. Along the Pacific coast, indigenous peoples built rich maritime societies tied to fishing, trade, artistry, and ceremony. North America, before the United States, was not just populated, it was staggeringly diverse. And that brings us to the deeper truth hidden beneath the usual version of the story. North America, before the United States, was not just inhabited, it was political. Power existed here long before Congress. Alliances existed here long before the Constitution. Diplomacy, negotiation, ritual, conflict, and balance of influence were already shaping entire regions. The Haudenosaunee are one of the clearest examples, but they were not alone. Across the continent, peoples formed relationships through kinship, trade, war, ceremony, and shared territory. Europeans did not bring politics to an empty land. They entered a continent already structured by it. Then the Europeans arrived, and from that moment the entire continent began to change. The Spanish pushed into the south and southwest. The French moved through rivers and trade networks. The British established colonies along the Atlantic coast, but they were not stepping into blank space. They were entering older worlds with older names and older claims. That is one of the great reversals of this history. What later generations called discovery often looked, from the other side, like intrusion. And the transformation that followed was not simple. It did not happen in one battle or one generation. It came in waves. Disease moved faster than armies and devastated communities that had never faced such illnesses before. Trade altered balances of power that had existed for centuries. New weapons reshaped older conflicts. Colonization pressed harder and harder on land, and land was never just land. It was memory, survival, inheritance, and the center of the world for the people who lived there. This is why it is so misleading to imagine that native people simply faded away before the rise of the United States. They did not fade away. They were hit by forces powerful enough to shatter entire worlds. And yet, even after violence, disease, displacement, and erasure, they endured. Their nations endured. Their memory endured. Their names endured. Their descendants endured. That may be the most important thing this story reveals. The United States did not rise from a void. It rose on top of older worlds, worlds that were displaced, renamed, ignored, romanticized, or buried beneath national mythology. If you look at the modern map of America, you see states and borders. But beneath that map lies another one, a map of older homelands, older nations, older sacred geographies, and older histories attached to the land long before the Republic was born. So what was America before America? It was not silence. It was not emptiness. It was not a wilderness waiting for destiny. It was a continent of many civilizations. A continent where the Haudenosaunee built alliances powerful enough to shape regions, where the Cherokee rooted life in old homelands, where Pueblo ancestors built enduring communities in stone and desert earth, and where cities like Cahokia rose and flourished centuries before the United States existed. And maybe the greatest illusion in popular history is the idea that America began when Europeans started writing it down. Because history does not begin when one civilization notices another. A land does not become real only when outsiders name it. Before America was America, it was already old, already inhabited, already sacred, already full of nations whose worlds were deep, real, and human. And in many ways, that older America never disappeared. It is still there, in the land, in the memory, and in the nations that endured.